They called her delusional, whispering that she was walking straight into a slaughterhouse. In the high-stakes arena of New York divorce courts, representing yourself against a shark like Bruno Sterling was considered suicidal, especially when he'd hired the deadliest lawyer in the city. Everyone in Department 42 anticipated a bloodbath. They expected Jessica Sterling to crumble, sign the papers, and vanish into poverty. Bruno certainly did. He even chuckled audibly when she stood to face him. But he'd overlooked one crucial detail. The person who builds an empire knows exactly where all the skeletons are buried. What unfolded over the next 3 days didn't just silence his laughter. It shocked the entire legal system and unearthed a secret so dark that the judge threatened to have everyone arrested. This is the story of the wife who played the fool, only to ultimately checkmate the king. The laughter wasn't subtle. It was a rich, throaty sound that reverberated off the mahogany walls of the Superior Court of New York, Department 42. It was the sound of a man who had never faced defeat. Bruno Sterling leaned back in his Italian leather chair, smoothing the lapel of his $3,000 charcoal suit. He turned to his attorney, Silas Blackwood, a man known in legal circles as the Butcher of Broadway, and whispered loud enough for half the room to hear, "Look at her, Silas. She's wearing that dress I bought her for a charity gala 5 years ago. It's pathetic. She actually thinks she's in a movie." Silas Blackwood, a man with silver hair and eyes like chipped flint, didn't laugh. He merely smirked, tapping his gold fountain pen against the heavy oak table. "Let her play pretend, Bruno. It only makes the kill easier. Judge Henderson hates time wasters. She'll be held in contempt before lunch." Across the aisle at the plaintiff's table sat Jessica Sterling. She appeared small and vulnerable. The courtroom air conditioning was blasting, and she shivered slightly. "He told me to prescribe heavy sedatives to make her look confused in public. I needed the money."
"I'm sorry, Jessica."
"I'm so sorry." "Objection," Silas roared, desperate to stop the bleeding. "This witness is clearly under duress. He is unreliable." "The only duress I see, Mr. Blackwood," Judge Henderson said, his eyes narrowing, "is the perjury your client just suborned. Sit down before I have you joined as a co-defendant."
Silas sat down.
He moved his chair 6 inches away from Bruno. Jessica looked at her husband. Bruno was no longer the arrogant tycoon. He was sweating, his perfectly gelled hair starting to droop. He looked small. "I have no further questions for this witness," Jessica said. "Dr. Thorne," the judge said ominously, "you are not to leave this building. The bailiff will escort you to a holding room. The district attorney will be very interested in your testimony." As Thorne was led away, sobbing, the courtroom felt like a pressure cooker about to explode. Jessica returned to her table. She had won the battle of character. She had proven she wasn't crazy. But she still had to prove where the money was and why it mattered, because Bruno wasn't just hiding money from her. He was hiding it from everyone. "Mrs. Sterling," the judge said, his tone respectful now, "do you have further evidence regarding the assets?" "I do, Your Honor," Jessica said. "But for this part, I'm going to need a calculator, and I'm going to need the court to look at the pension fund for the employees of Sterling Dynamics." Bruno's head snapped up. If looks could kill, Jessica would have been dead on the spot. The fear in his eyes wasn't just about divorce anymore. It was the fear of prison. "The pension fund?" Silas Blackwood whispered. He turned to Bruno. "What did you do, Bruno?"
"Tell me right now."
"If you lie to me again, I walk." "It's complicated," Bruno stammered. "I borrowed against it, just temporarily, to cover the margin calls on the expansion. If Giovanni dies intestate, the land goes to the daughter. If I marry the daughter, the land becomes a marital asset. We can bypass the union contracts. It's cleaner than a buyout." Jessica gasped, a ragged sound in the empty room. The romance, the flowers, the way Bruno had accidentally bumped into her at the diner, it was never love. It was a cold, calculated corporate acquisition. She was nothing more than a deed with a heartbeat. But the next entry shattered her soul completely. Asterisk entry August 15th, 2014. Problem solved. The old man wouldn't get out of the road. SB was driving. It was messy but effective. Police report filed as a hit and run.
No witnesses.
We own the girl now. Tears blurred Jessica's vision. Her father hadn't died of a heart attack or a random accident. He had been murdered, run down in the street like an animal so Bruno could build a parking lot. And the initials SB? Silas Blackwood. Asterisk buzz. Asterisk the intercom on her desk jolted her so violently she nearly dropped the book. Mrs. Sterling, the night security guard's voice crackled. Mr. Blackwood is here. He says he has urgent papers regarding the plea deal. Jessica stared at the intercom, paralyzed by a wave of horror and disbelief. The murderer was in the lobby, waiting. Send him up, she whispered, her voice sounding foreign, almost detached from her own body. She had mere seconds. She shoved the red notebook into her purse. She slid her phone under a stack of files, quickly hitting record on the voice memo app. She grabbed a can of pepper spray she had started carrying since the divorce proceedings began, concealing it in her palm beneath a file folder. The elevator chimed, the sound deafening in the silent office. Silas Blackwood walked in, his presence filling the room with a palpable sense of dread. He wasn't the polished lawyer she knew. He wore a dark trench coat, his eyes rimmed with red, looking like a man who had stared into the abyss and blinked. Unlike the defense table, which was cluttered with paralegals, laptops, and stacks of bound evidence, Jessica's table was bare except for a single yellow legal pad and a plastic cup of water. She kept her head down, her brown hair pulled back in a severe, practical bun. To the casual observer, she looked like a defeated woman, a housewife who had been traded in for a newer model, specifically Bruno's 24-year-old personal assistant, Tiffany. All rise, the bailiff bellowed. The heavy door behind the bench swung open, and the Honorable Judge William P. Henderson swept into the room. Henderson was an old-school jurist. He had zero tolerance for theatrics, and even less for incompetence. He adjusted his glasses and glanced down at the docket. Case number 49, Tusto. Sterling versus Sterling. Judge Henderson grumbled. We are here for the final hearing on asset division and spousal support. Appearances. Silas Blackwood stood up smoothly, buttoning his jacket. Silas Blackwood, representing the respondent, Mr. Bruno Sterling, Your Honor. The judge looked to the other table. And for the petitioner? Jessica stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor, a harsh noise in the otherwise quiet room. Bruno chuckled again, covering his mouth with a well-manicured hand. Jessica Sterling, Your Honor, she said. Her voice was soft, trembling slightly. Representing myself. Judge Henderson peered over his spectacles. He sighed a long, weary exhale, signaling that he was already dreading this trial. Mrs. Sterling, I am going to ask you this once, and I want you to listen carefully. Your husband is the CEO of Sterling Dynamics. The marital assets in question are estimated in the tens of millions. Mr. Blackwood here has been practicing law for 30 years. Are you absolutely certain you wish to proceed? Because right now, you are bringing a knife to a nuclear war, madam. I can't afford an attorney, Your Honor, Jessica said, looking down at her hands. Mr. Silas closed his eyes and pinched the bridge of his nose. You embezzled from your employee's retirement to fund a shell company, Bruno? That's federal. Mrs. Sterling, proceed, the judge ordered. Jessica walked to the projector. She placed a new document on the glass. It was a complex spreadsheet filled with rows of numbers and dates. Exhibit D, Jessica announced. This is a comparison of the employee contributions to the Sterling Dynamics 401k plan versus the actual deposits made into the custodial account at Chase Bank. She used a laser pointer, a cheap one she probably bought at a gas station, to circle a column. From January 2022 to present, Jessica explained, her voice steady. Every employee had 5% of their paycheck deducted for retirement. That money was supposed to go to Chase Bank, but it didn't. She slapped another paper down. This, she said, is the ledger from Blue Ocean Holdings in the Cayman Islands. The dates aligned perfectly. January 15th, $400,000 vanished from the payroll. January 16th, $3,008,000 materialized in Blue Ocean's account. He was bleeding the retirement fund dry, funneling it through the Cayman Islands to dodge taxes, and then discreetly buying real estate under his mistress's name. The courtroom buzzed with the electric tension of revelation. This was no longer a simple divorce case. It had morphed into a corporate scandal of epic proportions. "Mr. Blackwood," the judge stated, his voice laced with a chilling calm. "Does your client have any explanation as to why the employee pension fund is conspicuously empty?" Silas rose slowly, a defeated weariness etched on his face. He looked like a man confronting the very real possibility that his career, along with his clients', might be over today. "Your Honor," Silas began, "we respectfully request a recess. I need to confer with my client regarding potential criminal liability." "Denied," Judge Henderson shot back, without a moment's hesitation. "We are in the midst of a trial." "Working late, Jessica," Silas said, closing the heavy oak door behind him. The lock clicked into place. "You're taking to the throne quite naturally." "What do you want, Silas?" Jessica asked, her voice trembling slightly. She remained behind the desk, her fingers gripping the file folder tightly. "I'm here to save you," Silas lied smoothly, walking toward the wet bar. He poured himself a generous scotch, his hand surprisingly steady. "Bruno is cracking. He's going to trade everyone to the feds. Me, the board, you. But I can protect you, Jessica. I can make sure your name stays out of the indictment." "I haven't done anything wrong," Jessica said, watching him like a hawk, her senses on high alert. "It doesn't matter," Silas smiled, a cold, reptilian expression that sent a shiver down her spine. He walked around the desk, invading her personal space. "I need leverage. I need the notebook, Jessica." Jessica's breath caught in her throat. "I don't know what you mean." "Don't play the fool anymore, Jessica," Silas sighed, leaning casually against the edge of the desk. "I tracked the biometric log. You opened the safe. You know about the land. You know about the accident." "It wasn't an accident," Jessica said, her voice shaking with barely contained rage. "You killed him. You killed my father." The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bones. Silas didn't deny it. He took a sip of his drink, looking almost bored. "It was necessary," he said simply. "Giovanni was an obstacle. We removed him, and you got a life of luxury in exchange. Was it really such a bad trade?" "You are a monster," Jessica whispered, her voice trembling with disgust. "I am a pragmatist," Silas corrected her, setting the glass down with a soft thud. "Now, give me the book. If the DOJ gets their hands on that, it's a murder charge. I won't go down alone, Jessica. I'll plant evidence that you were driving the car. Who will they believe? The grieving widow or the greedy ex-wife?" "Sterling cut off my access to the joint accounts 6 months ago." Silas Blackwood shot up. "Objection. Your Honor, Mr. Sterling merely secured the assets to prevent frivolous spending. We offered Mrs. Sterling a generous settlement of $50,000 to cover her transition. She refused it out of spite." The judge raised an eyebrow. "For an estate of this size, it's more than she came into the marriage with," Silas said smoothly. "She was a waitress when they met, Your Honor. She has no financial literacy. We are trying to protect the estate." "I see," the judge said. He looked at Jessica. "Mrs. Sterling, I strongly advise you to reconsider the settlement. If you proceed, you will be held to the same standards as a practicing attorney. I will not hold your hand. If you fail to object, evidence gets in. If you fail to file the right motions, you lose. Do you understand?" Jessica looked up. For a split second, the fear in her eyes seemed to vanish, replaced by something colder, something harder. But it was gone so fast, Bruno missed it. "I understand, Your Honor," she said. "I'm ready." Bruno leaned over to Silas. "Watch this. She's going to cry in 10 minutes. Mr. Blackwood, your opening statement," the judge ordered. Silas Blackwood walked to the center of the room. He didn't use notes, he was a performer. "Your Honor," Silas began, his voice baritone and trustworthy. "This case is simple. It is a tragedy, yes, but a simple one. Bruno Sterling is a visionary. He built Sterling Dynamics from a garage startup into a global logistics empire. He worked 18-hour days. He missed holidays. He sacrificed everything for the success of the family." Silas gestured accusingly at Jessica. And what did his wife do? She stayed home. She attended luncheons. She spent his money. And now that the marriage has unfortunately broken down due to irreconcilable differences, she wants half. If your client wishes to invoke his Fifth Amendment rights against self-incrimination regarding the embezzlement, he is free to do so. However, that will allow me to draw an adverse inference regarding the marital assets. In layman's terms, Mr. Blackwood, if he remains silent to avoid jail time, he forfeits the divorce settlement. If he speaks to win the divorce, he risks incriminating himself and going to jail. The choice is his. It was the ultimate checkmate, a corner into which Bruno had painted himself. Bruno surged to his feet, shoving Silas aside. This is ridiculous.
Bruno bellowed.
I am the CEO. It's my company. I can move capital wherever I damn well please. I was going to pay it back. It was simply a bridge loan. A bridge loan unauthorized by the board, perhaps? Jessica inquired serenely from her table. Because I happen to have the board meeting minutes right here, Bruno. You never informed them. In fact, you fired the internal auditor, Mr. Timothy Clark, who dared to question it last month, didn't you? Clark was incompetent. Bruno yelled, his face flushing crimson. Just like you. You think you're so smart, Jessica? You think you can take me down? I built this empire. I am Sterling Dynamics. Without me, you are nothing. You're just a waitress. Mr. Sterling, the judge's gavel slammed down with a resounding crack. Control yourself.
No.
Bruno was completely unhinged now. The carefully constructed facade of the cool, collected billionaire had shattered completely. She hacked my computer. That's illegal. This evidence is inadmissible. Arrest her. I didn't hack your computer, Bruno, Jessica said softly, her voice barely audible. The room fell silent to hear her. I didn't have to, she continued. You linked your iPad to the family cloud account so you could conveniently upload photos of your little getaways with Tiffany. He held out his hand, his eyes glinting with malice. The book now. Jessica looked at the door, calculating the distance. It was 20 feet away. She looked back at Silas, her mind racing. Okay, she said, reaching into her purse. You win. She pulled out the red notebook. Silas's eyes lit up with avarice. He reached for it eagerly. Jessica tossed the book high into the air, over his head, catching him completely by surprise. Silas's instincts took over. He spun around, lunging desperately to catch the evidence before it hit the floor. In that split second, Jessica dropped the file folder, raised the pepper spray, and unleashed a searing stream of burning orange fire directly into his face. Silas screamed, the sound primal and terrifying. He clawed at his eyes, stumbling backward into the wet bar. Glass shattered and crashed around him. Jessica didn't hesitate. She grabbed the notebook from the floor and bolted. You witch! Silas roared, swinging blindly. You're dead. Jessica sprinted for the elevator, slamming her hand against the call button with frantic urgency. Come on, come on. She could hear Silas stumbling down the hallway behind her, cursing in a blind rage, fueled by pain and desperation. The doors opened with a welcome ding. She threw herself inside and hit the lobby button. As the door slid shut, she saw Silas burst into the hallway, his face swollen and red, a jagged shard of broken glass clutched tightly in his hand. The doors closed, sealing her inside. But as the elevator descended, Jessica knew the nightmare wasn't over. She was trapped in a building with a killer, and there was nowhere left to hide. The elevator doors slid open with a cheerful ding that felt obscenely bright in the dark lobby. Jessica stumbled out into the cavernous space of marble and glass. It was usually bustling with activity, but tonight it was a silent tomb. She sprinted toward the revolving doors, her heels clicking loudly on the polished floor. She wants to dismantle a company that employs thousands of people just to fund a lifestyle she did nothing to earn. We will prove that a prenuptial agreement exists, one that she claims to have lost, and that her contributions to the marriage were negligible. We ask the court to limit support to the statutory minimum and grant Mr. Sterling full retention of the company shares. He sat down. It was a strong opening statement. It painted Bruno as the hard-working hero and Jessica as the leech. "Mrs. Sterling," the judge said, "your opening statement. Keep it brief." Jessica walked around the table. She didn't go to the podium. She stood awkwardly in the middle of the aisle. She held her yellow notepad against her chest like a shield. "My husband, Bruno," she started, her voice shaking. "He says I did nothing. He says I was just a waitress. That is true. I was a waitress at the Blue Diner on 4th Street when we met." Bruno rolled his eyes. Here comes the sob story, he thought. But Jessica continued, taking a breath. "The law in this state speaks of a partnership. It speaks of good faith. Bruno is asking you to believe that he built Sterling Dynamics alone. He is asking you to believe that the $50 million in the Vanguard Trust doesn't exist." The room went dead silent. Silas Blackwood's head snapped up.
Bruno froze.
"The what trust?" Judge Henderson asked, leaning forward. "The Vanguard Trust, Your Honor," Jessica said, her voice stabilizing, "and the shell company in the Cayman Islands, registered as Blue Ocean Holdings, and the 3 commercial properties in Seattle purchased under the name of his driver, Thomas Miller." Bruno's face went from smug to purple in the span of 3 seconds. He slammed his hand on the table. "That's a lie. She's lying." "Mr. Sterling, sit down," the judge barked. He turned his gaze to Jessica. The pity was gone, replaced by sharp interest. "Mrs. Sterling, those are serious allegations. You were so arrogant. You didn't even realize that every document you saved, every spreadsheet you edited, was automatically backing up to the family server in the basement. The server I paid to install to store our wedding photos, remember?" She looked at him with a mixture of pity and disgust. "You took everything from me, Bruno, my dignity, my friends. You even tried to take my sanity. But you forgot to change your iCloud settings." A ripple of nervous, shocked laughter spread through the gallery. Silas Blackwood began hastily packing his briefcase. "Where are you going, Mr. Blackwood?" Judge Henderson inquired, his voice carrying through the stunned silence. "I am withdrawing as counsel, Your Honor," Silas stated, pointedly avoiding eye contact with Bruno. "My client has not only lied to me, but has also implicated me in suborning perjury and is currently confessing to federal wire fraud on the record. I am ethically bound to withdraw." "You sit your backside down, Silas," Bruno roared, grabbing his lawyer's arm. "I pay you $1,000 an hour. You don't leave until I say so. Get your hands off me." Silas snarled, shaking off Bruno's grip with surprising force. "Mr. Blackwood, you will remain until this hearing is concluded," the judge ruled firmly. "But you are not required to suborn further perjury. Now, Mrs. Sterling, you have proven the assets exist. You have proven spousal abuse and fraud. What is your request for judgment?" Jessica took a deep breath, steadying herself. She glanced at the yellow pad where she had meticulously written out her closing argument.
She didn't need it.
"I don't want half, Your Honor," she declared. Bruno froze, his face a mask of disbelief.
"What?"
"I don't want half," Jessica repeated, her voice ringing with conviction. "I want it all." "On what grounds?" the judge asked, clearly intrigued. "On the grounds of dissipation of assets," Jessica replied, citing the relevant legal precedent. She pushed against the heavy glass, her heart pounding in her chest. It didn't move. Panic surged in her throat. The night security protocol. The building automatically locked down at midnight. She checked her pockets frantically, but Bruno's access card was gone, lost in the struggle upstairs. She was trapped. "Jessica." The scream echoed down the elevator shaft, followed by the heavy thud of footsteps on the emergency stairwell door. Silas hadn't waited for the elevator. He had taken the stairs, fueled by a murderous rage. Jessica dove behind the granite security desk just as the stairwell door burst open. Silas Blackwood limped into the lobby, his presence a grotesque mockery of the polished lawyer he once was. He looked monstrous, his eyes red and streaming tears from the pepper spray, his skin blotchy and swollen. In his right hand, he gripped a jagged shard of heavy crystal, a makeshift dagger capable of lethal damage. "I know you're in here," Silas rasped, his voice echoing off the marble walls. "The doors are locked. You can't get out, and the police won't get here in time. Jessica crouched lower, clutching the red notebook tightly to her chest, her heart hammering against her ribs. Her phone was still in her hand. The call with Agent Miller silently connected. You think you've won? Silas taunted, moving slowly toward the center of the room, hunting her by sound. You think because you found a diary you can take us down? Bruno is weak, but I solve problems, just like I solved your father. He stopped abruptly, his head cocked to one side. He heard her ragged breathing behind the desk. Found you. Silas lunged. Jessica screamed and scrambled backward, backing away toward the massive decorative fountain in the center of the lobby. Silas closed the distance, raising the glass dagger high above his head, his face twisted into a mask of pure hate. Give me the book, Jessica, he snarled, and I'll make it quick. Alleging hidden assets without proof is a quick way to get your case dismissed and pay the other side's legal fees. I know, Your Honor, Jessica said. She walked back to her table and picked up a single document. I don't have a law degree, but I do have the invoices and I have the bank transfer records. She handed the paper to the bailiff. Marked as Exhibit A, she said softly. Silas Blackwood snatched the copy from the bailiff. His eyes scanned the page. It was a wire transfer record, a transfer of $4 million from Sterling Dynamics to a generic account in the Caymans. Silas looked at Bruno. You told me the accounts were clean, he hissed. They are, Bruno whispered frantically, sweat beading on his forehead. That account is encrypted. There's no way she could have that. She doesn't even know how to use Excel. Jessica sat back down. She looked at Bruno, and for the first time, she smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a hunter who had just sprung the trap. Call your first witness, Mr. Blackwood, the judge said, his voice dropping an octave. And this better be good. The air in the courtroom had shifted. It was no longer a slaughter. It was a brawl. Silas Blackwood was a seasoned veteran, though. He knew how to recover. He shoved the paper into his briefcase, dismissing it as a forgery or a misunderstanding to be dealt with later. I call Mr. Anthony Rossi to the stand, Silas announced. Anthony Rossi was Bruno's CFO, chief financial officer, a man with a nervous twitch and a suit that cost more than Jessica's first car. He took the oath. Mr. Rossi, Silas began, pacing. You manage the finances for Sterling Dynamics, correct?
Correct, I do, Rossi said.
Are you familiar with the plaintiff's claims regarding hidden assets in the Cayman Islands or a Vanguard trust? I have never heard of such things. Rossi lied smoothly. Our books are audited annually. Everything is above board. Mrs. When one spouse maliciously wastes or hides assets to defraud the other, the court has the discretion to award 100% of the remaining estate to the victim. Bruno has emptied the pension fund, leaving countless employees in financial ruin. He has squandered millions on his mistress. He has concealed the rest in the Caymans. If you grant him half, he will simply flee the country. He has a flight booked to Brazil for tonight at 10 p.m. She held up a printout of an airline ticket as evidence. Exhibit E, she stated. Bruno frantically checked his pockets for his phone. He had booked that flight a mere 2 hours ago during the bathroom break. How did she get it? My iCloud, he whispered, horrified. He is a flight risk, Your Honor, Jessica emphasized. Therefore, I am asking for full control of the remaining liquid assets, the marital home, and the shares of Sterling Dynamics to be held in trust, so that I can repay the employees he so callously stole from. It was a noble move, a testament to her character. She wasn't seeking the money for personal luxuries. She was fighting to save the livelihoods of the workers he had wronged. Judge Henderson looked from Bruno to the evidence, then to the weeping Dr. Thorne being escorted out the side door. I am inclined to agree, the judge said, his voice resonating with authority. Mr. Sterling, surrender your passport to the bailiff immediately. I left it at home, Bruno stammered, a pathetic lie. Bailiff, search him, the judge ordered. The bailiff stepped forward. Don't touch me, Bruno screamed, backing away. He cast a desperate look at the exit, then at the window. He was a trapped animal, cornered and desperate. Suddenly, The heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom burst open with a deafening crash. Every head in the room snapped around. 6 men and women in navy blue windbreakers with bright yellow lettering marched in, followed by 2 uniformed NYPD officers. The lettering on the jackets didn't say FBI. Jessica looked at the lethal shard of glass, then at the phone clutched in her trembling hand. "No," she said, her voice shaking but defiant. "I'm not giving you the book, Silas. But I will give you an audience." She held up the phone, her voice ringing with newfound resolve. "Agent Miller, did you hear that confession?" A crisp, amplified voice cut through the silence of the lobby. "We got it all, Mrs. Sterling. Look at the door." Silas froze, his eyes wide with disbelief. Asterisk crash. Asterisk the glass revolving doors shattered inward as a SWAT armored truck rammed through the entrance. Men in tactical gear swarmed through the opening, lasers cutting through the dust and debris. Federal agents descended upon Silas. Realizing that it was over, he dropped the glass shard and fell to his knees in defeat, his body racked with sobs. As the officers moved to apprehend him, Silas Blackwood stood there blinking in the blinding lights. Swarmed by the officers, Agent Miller navigated through the scattered remains to reach Jessica, who stood there, visibly trembling. "Mrs. Sterling." Jessica, her voice barely a whisper, handed him the crimson notebook. "Here," she breathed. "The murder, the fraud, it's all documented inside." 6 months later, the once mighty Sterling empire had crumbled completely. Silas Blackwood, now stripped of his immunity thanks to the compelling new evidence, was formally charged with first-degree murder. He ultimately perished in prison, only 3 months into his life sentence. Bruno Sterling, in a desperate attempt to mitigate the damage, accepted a plea deal that would keep him incarcerated for 25 years, sobbing openly as he was led away in handcuffs. But the narrative truly concluded where it had all started, with the land itself. On a clear, crisp autumn morning, Jessica stood at the head of the Sterling Dynamics boardroom table. The predatory corporate raiders were conspicuously absent. Sterling is likely confusing standard operating expenses with whatever fantasy she has cooked up. "Thank you," Silas said, looking at the judge. "You see, Your Honor, a misunderstanding of complex corporate finance." He turned to Jessica. "Your witness." Jessica stood up. She didn't bring her notepad this time. She walked right up to the witness stand. She looked Anthony Rossi in the eye. Rossi shifted in his seat. He had known Jessica for 10 years. He used to come over for Christmas dinner. He knew she made a great lasagna. He didn't know she could read a balance sheet. "Hello, Anthony," Jessica said. "Mrs. Sterling," he nodded stiffly. "Anthony, do you recall the corporate retreat in Aspen in 2021? Yes, I was there. Do you remember giving me your laptop to hold while you went skiing because you were afraid to leave it in the hotel room safe?" Rossi blinked. "I might have. I don't recall." "I recall it," Jessica said. "You were very drunk that night. Anthony, you told me the password was your daughter's birthday, July 14th, 2012. A 712. "Objection," Silas shouted. "Relevance?" "I'm getting there, Your Honor," Jessica said calmly. "Anthony, is it true that Sterling Dynamics utilizes a software called Shadow Ledger for internal accounting?" Rossi's face drained of color. That is an industry-standard tool." "Is it? Because I did some research. Shadow Ledger is a dual-entry bookkeeping system designed specifically to maintain 2 sets of books, one for the IRS and one for the owners. Is that correct?" I take the fifth," Rossi stammered. The courtroom gasped. "You can't take the Fifth Amendment in a civil divorce trial regarding corporate procedure unless you are admitting to a crime, Mr. Rossi." Judge Henderson boomed. "Answer the question." It has that capability," Rossi whispered. And Jessica continued, relentless. "It read SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission, and behind them, the DOJ, Department of Justice." The lead agent, a tall woman with a stern expression, pointed directly at the defense table. "Bruno Sterling," she announced, her voice cutting through the stunned silence. "I am Special Agent Miller. We have a warrant for your arrest for securities fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering. Bruno slumped back into his chair, defeated. He looked at Jessica, a desperate plea in his eyes. Jessica didn't look away. She offered no smile, no gloating expression of triumph. She simply watched. "I told you, Bruno," she whispered, though he couldn't possibly have heard her across the room. "I told you, I wasn't crazy." But the drama wasn't over. As the agents moved to cuff Bruno, Silas Blackwood suddenly stood up. "Officer," Silas said, pointing at Bruno, "my client has just confessed to additional crimes on the court record. I suggest you get the transcript." "You traitor!" Bruno roared, lunging at Silas. The chaos of Bruno Sterling's arrest took a full 20 minutes to resolve. The spectacle of the billionaire CEO being dragged out in handcuffs, screaming obscenities at his own lawyer and wife, was the kind of sensational event that would dominate the news cycle for weeks. When the doors finally closed, leaving the courtroom in a stunned, dusty silence, only a few people remained: Jessica, Judge Henderson, the court reporter, and Silas Blackwood, who was frantically shoving papers into his briefcase, looking like a rat sensing that the ship had already broken in half. "Mr. Blackwood," Judge Henderson said, his voice echoing in the now empty room. Silas froze, his movements arrested. "You are perilously close to being disbarred, Mr. Blackwood," the judge continued, his tone unwavering. "If you want to salvage your license, you will cooperate fully with the court-appointed receiver. Do I make myself clear?" "Crystal, Your Honor," Silas said, wiping beads of sweat from his brow. In their place sat the individuals who had truly built the company: truck drivers, dedicated shift managers, and hardworking secretaries. "This company," Jessica declared, her voice resonating with conviction, "was built on the very land my father sacrificed everything for." She paused, allowing her words to sink in. "Effective immediately, Sterling Dynamics will be restructured as an employee-owned cooperative. You, the employees, will own the shares and you will rightfully keep the profits." A thunderous wave of cheers erupted throughout the room. Jessica quietly exited the building and drove to a peaceful cemetery nestled in New Jersey. There, she knelt before a simple gravestone, the inscription reading, "Joanne Russo." "I got it back, Papa," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion as she gently placed the court order on the soft grass. "I reclaimed the land and I made them answer for their crimes." She rose, wiping away the tears that streamed down her face. She was no longer just a waitress, nor was she simply a victim. She was Jessica Russo, and she had never felt more powerful. They say that hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. But Jessica's story demonstrated that fury doesn't always manifest as a loud, explosive outburst. Sometimes, it's meticulously organized and strategically executed. Bruno and Silas mistakenly believed they were untouchable, shielded by their wealth and influence. They underestimated Jessica, dismissing her as just a housewife. But they tragically overlooked a fundamental truth: never, ever corner a survivor. Jessica didn't just secure a divorce. She systematically dismantled an entire criminal empire and brought a cold-blooded murderer to justice. If you found this tale of justice, served ice cold, to be compelling, please be sure to hit that like button. It provides invaluable support to the channel. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss another gripping drama. On the night of December 14th, 2023, just 3 days before Bruno filed for divorce, did you oversee a transfer of $6 million labeled consulting fees to a company called Orion Group? Bruno told me to, Rossi blurted out, looking at his boss in panic. He said it was for future expansion. And who owns Orion Group, Anthony? I don't know, Rossi lied. Jessica turned to the judge. Your Honor, I would like to submit Exhibit B. It is the Articles of Incorporation for Orion Group, registered in Nevada. She placed the document on the overhead projector. The name on the registration was clear for everyone to see. Tiffany Miller. The courtroom erupted. Bruno buried his face in his hands. Tiffany Miller was the mistress. Order. Order. Judge Henderson slammed his gavel. He glared at Bruno Sterling. Mr. Blackwood, control your client and your witnesses, or I will start issuing sanctions that will make your head spin. Silas Blackwood looked at Bruno with pure venom. You told me the girl wasn't involved in the financials, he hissed. She's not, Bruno whispered back, terrified. I just used her name. I didn't think Jessica would find it. She's a housewife, Silas.
She knits.
Jessica returned to her table. She sat down and took a sip of water. Her hand was shaking violently now. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving her nauseous. She looked at Bruno. He wasn't laughing anymore. He was looking at her with a mixture of fear and confusion. He looked like a man who had walked into his own house and found a stranger sitting in his chair. But Jessica knew this was just the beginning. Exposing the money was the easy part. The hard part was proving why she deserved it. Because Bruno had one card left to play, a card that could destroy her reputation and leave her with nothing, regardless of the money. Silas stood up. He adjusted his tie. He looked dangerous now. The smirk was gone, replaced by the cold, calculating look of a predator who had been wounded. He darted a furtive glance at Jessica, a look of calculation, not defeat, flickering in his eyes before he hurried out the side exit. Jessica stood alone at the plaintiff's table, feeling strangely weighted down. The adrenaline crash was coming. Mrs. Sterling, the judge said gently, drawing her attention. Jessica looked up. Yes, Your Honor? In light of the federal indictment and the freezing of Mr. Sterling's personal assets, the company, Sterling Dynamics, is effectively headless. The stock is going to freefall the moment the market opens tomorrow. Thousands of jobs are at risk. I know, Jessica said softly. That's why I asked for control. Judge Henderson nodded slowly, his expression grave. I am granting you an emergency conservatorship over the voting shares held by the marital estate. Until the divorce is finalized or the criminal trial concludes, you are, for all intents and purposes, the owner of Sterling Dynamics. He leaned forward, his gaze intense. Be careful, Jessica. You just took down a wolf, but you're about to walk into a den of vipers. The board of directors won't welcome you with open arms. They will try to eat you alive. Jessica picked up her yellow notepad, her movements now purposeful. She no longer resembled the trembling woman who had walked into the courtroom 3 hours earlier. Let them try, she said. 2 hours later, a black town car pulled up to the gleaming glass skyscraper in Midtown Manhattan. The logo of Sterling Dynamics was etched in steel above the revolving doors. Jessica stepped out. She hadn't changed clothes. She was still wearing the 5-year-old dress Bruno had mocked. But as she walked through the lobby, the atmosphere was electric with fear and uncertainty. Employees huddled in corners, whispering amongst themselves. They had seen the news reports. They knew the FBI had raided the headquarters earlier that morning. When she reached the executive floor, the reception area was deserted. The receptionist had fled. Let me know in the comments. Do you believe 25 years was a sufficient punishment for Bruno? Your Honor, Silas said, his voice icy, we would like to move past the financials for a moment. We would like to address the issue of conduct. We call Mrs. Jessica Sterling to the stand. Jessica froze. This was it, the cross-examination. She stood up and walked to the witness box. Mrs. Sterling, Silas began, walking close to her, invading her personal space. You seem very knowledgeable about your husband's business today. Surprisingly so. I pay attention, Jessica said. Do you? Silas smirked. Because, according to a sworn affidavit from your former psychiatrist, Dr. Aries Thorne, you suffer from paranoid delusions. Is it not true that you were institutionalized in 2018 for a mental breakdown? The room went silent again. This was the dirty laundry. I sought help for depression, Jessica said quietly. I lost a child. Yes, Silas said, his voice dripping with faux sympathy. A tragedy. But during that time, you accused your husband of spying on you. You accused him of gaslighting you. You were medicated, were you not? Yes. And isn't it true? Silas leaned in. That you have a history of fabricating stories to get attention? That you are, in medical terms, an unreliable narrator? Jessica looked at the judge, then at Bruno. Bruno was grinning again. This was his narrative. Crazy Jessica.
Sad, crazy Jessica.
I was medicated, Jessica said, her voice strengthening. Because my husband was gaslighting me, and I can prove that, too.
How?
Silas laughed. With more stolen documents? No, Jessica said. With the recordings. Silas stopped laughing. What recordings? The state of New York is a one-party consent state for audio recording. Jessica cited the law perfectly. For the last 2 years of our marriage, I carried a digital recorder in my pocket. Every threat, every admission, every time Bruno told me he would destroy me if I ever tried to leave, I have it all. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small black USB drive. Jessica walked straight to the double doors of the boardroom. She could hear the raised voices and frantic energy of shouting from inside. She pushed the doors open. Around the massive oval table sat 12 men and 1 woman, the board of directors. They were arguing loudly, phones pressed to their ears, ties loosened in a desperate attempt to alleviate the pressure. The room fell silent as Jessica entered. "Who let you in?" barked Conrad Vance, the chairman of the board. Vance was a 70-year-old corporate raider with a ruthless reputation for stripping companies for parts. "Security, get this woman out of here." "Sit down, Conrad," Jessica said, her voice surprisingly calm, yet cutting through the room like a razor. Vance scoffed. "Excuse me? Do you know who I am? This is a restricted meeting. Go home and bake cookies, Jessica. Your husband is in jail, and this company is under our control now." Jessica walked purposefully to the head of the table, to Bruno's empty chair.
She didn't sit.
Instead, she stood behind it, placing her hands on the leather backrest. "Actually," she said, pulling the court order from her bag and sliding it down the polished table, "it's under mine." Vance snatched the paper, his face draining of color as he read it. This is insane," Vance sputtered. "Henderson gave you the voting rights? You have no experience. You're a housewife." "I am the court-appointed conservator of the Sterling estate," Jessica corrected him, her tone unwavering, "which owns 51% of the voting stock. That makes me the chairwoman. And as my first act, I am calling this meeting to order." "We won't stand for this," said another board member, a heavy-set man named Baxter. "We are filing an emergency motion to remove you. The stock is down 40% in 2 hours. We need to sell the logistics division to Amazon by end of day to save capital." "No," Jessica stated firmly. "What do you mean, no?" Baxter stood up, his face reddening. "You don't understand business." "Exhibit C, Your Honor," she said. Bruno jumped to his feet, knocking his chair over. "She can't do that. That's private." "Silas, stop her." "Sit down," the judge roared. "Mr. Blackwood, if your client speaks one more time out of turn, I will have the bailiff gag him." The judge turned to Jessica. "Mrs. Sterling, you are telling me you have audio evidence of the respondent admitting to what, exactly?" Jessica looked straight at Bruno. "Admitting to the fraud, Your Honor, and admitting that he paid Dr. Thorne to falsify my diagnosis to keep me under control." The silence in the courtroom was heavy, suffocating. Even the court reporter stopped typing. "Play it," Judge Henderson ordered. The bailiff took the USB drive from Jessica's trembling hand. He plugged it into the court's AV system. A projection screen descended from the ceiling, displaying a simple media player interface. Judge Henderson leaned back, his face unreadable. "Mr. Blackwood, I am allowing this under the crime-fraud exception to marital privilege. If this recording contains evidence of a crime, your objection is overruled before you even make it." Silas Blackwood didn't object. He was too busy staring at his client. Bruno was gripping the edge of the table, so hard his knuckles were white. He looked like a man watching a bomb countdown. He couldn't stop. "Play it," the judge said. The courtroom speakers crackled with static, and then a voice filled the room. It was unmistakably Bruno Sterling. The audio was clear, recorded in a space with an echo, likely their high-ceilinged master bathroom. "Stop crying, Jessica. It's pathetic. You really think anyone is going to believe you? You're a high school dropout who got lucky. I know what you're doing with the Cayman accounts, Bruno. I saw the papers in your briefcase." "You saw papers? You don't even know what you're looking at. But let's say you do. Let's say you tell someone. Who are they going to believe?" We have a liquidity crisis. We have a corruption crisis, Jessica shot back, her eyes blazing. And we are not selling the logistics division. She paused, letting her words sink in. That division employs 4,000 people in Ohio and Michigan. If you sell it, they lose their pensions because of the way Bruno structured the debt. I read the contracts, Baxter. The room fell silent again. They were looking at her differently now, not with respect, but with caution, assessing her in a new light. So, what is your brilliant plan? Vance sneered, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Hug the employees until the stock recovers? No, Jessica said, her gaze unwavering. My plan is to cut the cancer out. She reached into her bag and pulled out a stack of folders, tossing one in front of Vance, one in front of Baxter, and one in front of the female board member, Linda Gray. What is this? Linda asked, hesitantly opening the folder. That, Jessica said, her voice steady, is a record of the kickbacks you three received from the construction of the new warehouse in Nevada. You approved a bid that was 20% higher than the market rate, and coincidentally, the construction company is owned by your brother-in-law, Linda. Linda went pale. Jessica turned her attention to Vance. And you, Conrad, you've been short-selling sterling stock for 3 months. You knew Bruno was cooking the books. You were betting against the very company you were supposed to be protecting. Vance slammed the folder shut, his hands trembling. This is slander. It's all in the emails, Jessica said, her voice unwavering. Bruno kept everything. He didn't trust you any more than you trusted him. She leaned forward, gripping the chair, her eyes locking onto each of theirs. Here is how this is going to work. Vance, Baxter, Gray, you are resigning, effective immediately. You will cite personal health reasons. The CEO of a Fortune 500 company or the hysterical housewife who spent a month in a psych ward. You put me there. You told Dr. Thorne to say I was paranoid. I didn't tell him anything. I bought him. $50,000 is a lot of money for a shrink with gambling debts. He'll write whatever diagnosis I want. Paranoia, schizophrenia, bipolar. Take your pick. If you try to touch my money, Jessica, I won't just divorce you. I will have you committed permanently. I will make sure you drool in a cup for the rest of your life while I enjoy my money with someone who appreciates it. Now, get out of my face. The silence that followed was louder than the recording itself. It was a heavy, suffocating silence. Judge Henderson slowly took off his glasses. He cleaned them with a small cloth, his movements deliberate and terrifyingly calm. He put them back on and looked down at the defense table. Mr. Blackwood, the judge said, his voice barely a whisper, did your client just admit to bribing a medical professional to falsify a mental health diagnosis for the purpose of discrediting a witness? Silas Blackwood stood up. He was pale. Your Honor, I have not heard this recording before. I cannot verify its authenticity. It could be deepfake technology. It could be AI generated. It's not AI, Jessica said from her table. She stood up, her voice stronger now. Because I didn't come alone, Your Honor. I have a witness. Who? Bruno snapped, his voice cracking. Who do you have? You have no friends. I isolated you from everyone. Jessica looked at the back of the courtroom. The heavy oak doors opened. A man walked in. He was disheveled. He wore a cheap suit that was 2 sizes too big. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week. He walked with a shuffle, his eyes darting around the room nervously. It was Dr. Aries Thorne. Bruno gasped. No. I call Dr. Aries Thorne to the stand, Jessica said. Silas Blackwood looked at Bruno. You said he was in Europe. You said he was unreachable. He was. If you do, I won't hand these folders to the SEC agents who are currently downstairs seizing the servers. If you fight me, you'll share a cell with Bruno. Vance looked at the other board members, seeking support. They looked away, avoiding his gaze. He was alone. You're a witch, Vance hissed, his face contorted with rage. I'm a wife who paid attention, Jessica replied, her voice laced with steel. Get out. Vance stood up abruptly, grabbed his coat, and stormed out of the room, followed by Baxter and Gray, their heads bowed in shame. Jessica looked at the remaining 9 board members. They sat perfectly still, terrified, uncertain of what would come next. "Now," Jessica said, finally sitting in the leather chair. It was too big for her, but she filled the room with her presence, a newfound authority radiating from her. "Let's talk about how we're going to pay back the pension fund." The first week of Jessica's reign as the interim CEO of Sterling Dynamics was a blur of adrenaline and caffeine. She had purged the board, stabilized the stock, and won the hearts of the employees. To the outside world, she was the victorious heroine. But inside the silent, glass-walled executive suite on the 42nd floor, Jessica felt a gnawing unease. She was winning the war for the company, but she still didn't understand why the war had started in the first place. Why had Bruno, a billionaire tycoon, married a waitress from a diner in New Jersey 10 years ago? It was 11 p.m. on a Thursday. The cleaners had long since departed, leaving the office in a heavy, pressurized silence. Jessica sat at Bruno's massive mahogany desk, staring at a painting of a 19th-century schooner on the wall. She remembered Bruno once bragging that he kept his real insurance policy behind that ship. She stood up, removed the painting, and found a wall safe. Bruno's ego was so fragile he used his own birthday as the code, and the heavy steel door clicked open. Bruno hissed. "I paid for his plane ticket." Dr. Thorne took the stand. He refused to look at Bruno. He looked at the floor, his hands shaking as he took the oath. "Dr. Thorne," Jessica said, approaching the stand, "you treated me in 2018?
Correct.
Yes, Thorne mumbled. "And you signed an affidavit submitted by Mr. Blackwood this morning stating that I suffer from severe paranoid delusions. Is that affidavit true?" Thorne looked up at the judge. He looked at the bailiff, who was standing near the door with a hand on his belt. Thorne swallowed hard.
No, Thorne whispered.
"Speak up, doctor," Judge Henderson barked.
No.
Thorne shouted, tears welling in his eyes. "It's not true. She's sane. She's always been sane. I made it up." The gallery erupted. Reporters were furiously typing on their phones. "Why did you lie, doctor?" Jessica asked gently. Thorne pointed a shaking finger at Bruno. "Because he told me to. He paid off my bookie. I owed 40 grand to some bad people. Bruno paid it. He told me to gaslight her. There was no cash inside, just a stack of old hard drives and a single, weather-beaten notebook bound in red leather." Jessica took the notebook to the desk and clicked on the brass reading lamp, casting a pool of light on the worn leather. She opened the cover. It wasn't a ledger. It was a diary of sins, meticulously cataloging bribes, illegal dumpings, and blackmail schemes going back 20 years. But as she flipped to the entries from 2014, her blood ran cold. Asterisk entry June 12, 2014. Target identified, Jessica Russo, daughter of Giovanni Russo, the union foreman holding the deed to the Saucus wetlands. He won't sell. He claims the land is sacred to his family. SB says we need a workaround. Jessica's hands began to tremble uncontrollably. Russo was her maiden name. Her father, Giovanni, had been a stubborn, proud man who had died penniless, or so she thought. She turned the page, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Asterisk entry July 4, 2014. SB suggests the widower route.